the most infamous serial killer of all time. For 3 months in 1888, fear and panic stalked the streets of London's East End. The overcrowded population lived in hovels, the streets stank of filth and refuse, and the only way to earn a living was by criminal means, and for many women, prostitution. More specifically, the Whitechapel district, an area with a proclivity for violence and crime amongst the backdrop of poverty. Whitechapel in the East End was like a festering sore on the face of Victorian London in the late 19th century. But suddenly, a string of murders terrorized the public in a way never seen before. The culprit, a madman with no clear motive. During these months 5 women were murdered and horribly mutilated by a man who became known as Jacktheripper, although some believe the true number to have been 11. Hundreds of suspects have been named for this case, and it has baffled investigators and ripperologists alike for over 100 years. Today we are going to cover the world's most notorious serial killer, Jacktheripper. Jacktheripper was an unidentified serial killer active in the largely impoverished areas in and around the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. In both the criminal case files and contemporary journalistic accounts, the killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leatherapron. Most believe the Ripper claimed the lives of only 5, now referred to as the canonical 5. Others believe the Ripper claimed the lives of up to 11 women. All 5 of the canonical victims were prostitutes, as many women in the Whitechapel district had to turn to prostitution as a way to survive. At the time of the murders, literacy was increasing amongst the general population. The murders were covered in the newspaper and the public became morbidly fascinated by them. In the end, the public was so upset at the failed attempts to identify the killer that the police commissioner and Home Secretary eventually resigned. Let's cover the 5 canonical victims and the most suspects ever presented with 8 possible killers. Without further ado, let's jump into the timeline. The terror started on Friday 31 August when the body of Mary Ann Nichols, aged 42, was found at the western end of Bucks Row, in Whitechapel. Bucks Row is now known as Durward Street. The body was discovered by a man named Charles Cross, who claims he was walking along Bucks Row when he noticed a bundle towards the western end. Another man named Robert Paul approached the body with Cross. Police would eventually arrive on the scene. Mary Ann Nichols was found on her back, her throat severely slashed, and she was disemboweled. It was determined she had only been dead for about a half hour, meaning the killer was likely nearby when Cross first saw the body. She was subsequently acknowledged to be the first of the Ripper's victims. On the 8th September the second victim was found. The body of Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old prostitute, was found at 29 Hanbury Street. Her body was found in a passageway behind 29 Hanbury Street by a man named John Davis, an elderly resident of the 29 Hanbury Street building. Her few possessions laid out next to her body. Her head was almost severed and her stomach torn open and pulled apart. Sections of skin from the stomach lay on her left shoulder and on the right shoulder. A mass of intestines. Part of the vagina and bladder had been carved out and taken away. Dr. George Baxter Phillips was serving as the divisional police surgeon at the time and proposed the idea that the killer had anatomical knowledge by the manner in which Annie Chapman's womb was removed. That's the first clue, he's a doctor. Later that month, on September 27, 1888, the Central News Agency receives a letter from the apparent killer, threatening more murders. It reads, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me. But they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever. And talk about being on the right track. That joke about leatherapron gave me real fits. I am down on whores and shan't quit tripping them. Till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue. And I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha. Ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off. And send to the police officer just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work. Then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind giving me the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha. Ha. This letter wasn't released to the public until October 1st, and many believe that it was fabricated by a journalist, but regardless, it made its way to the papers. The name caught the public imagination when it first appeared in the newspapers and was used ever afterwards. Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel was now in uproar. Riots broke out as hysterical crowds attacked anyone carrying a black bag, as a rumor had spread that the Ripper carried his knives in such a bag. 3 days later, on September 30th at 1 a.m. It was a grim day. The Ripper carried out 2 murders within minutes of each other. The body of Elizabeth Stride was found on Berner Street by a man named Louis Deems Hoots. Only her throat was cut, which led police to believe that the murder was interrupted when Deems Hoots approached. It was determined that she was dead for 30 minutes when examined around 1:15 a.m., shockingly, only 45 minutes after the discovery of Elizabeth Stride. At 1:45 a.m., the body of Catherine Eddowes, aged 43, was found just a few minutes' walk away in an alley between Mitre Square and Duke Street, now known as St. James Passage. Her body had been ripped open and her throat slashed. Both eyelids had been cut and part of her nose and right ear were cut. The uterus and left kidney were removed and entrails thrown over the right shoulder. The weird thing is that after he killed Catherine Eddowes here, he went back towards the direction of the first murder. But he dropped one of the only clues he actually left investigators. It's here that police would discover one of the few solid clues in the entire case. A piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron found near the scene of the crime. The apron was found by Alfred Long in the doorway of an apartment block near Goulston Street, a nearby street east of the Eddowes murder site. Near this apron a message was written in chalk that read, "The Juves are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." For some inexplicable reason, the head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Charles Warren, ordered it to be rubbed out. So what could have been a valuable clue was destroyed. A sign of the anti-Semitism that was common in the area. However, the crucial detail of this clue is the fact that it was found east of the Eddowes murder site, in the direction of Elizabeth Stride's murder site, the murder that occurred just 45 minutes prior. This perplexing decision could mean that the killer willingly entered an area that was swarming with cops. Aside from demonstrating the killer's evasive abilities, this could suggest the killer lived in this East London area, as it possibly explains the motive for entering a dangerous situation. The horror of the double murder gripped London. Rumors now began to circulate. The Ripper was a mad doctor, a Polish lunatic, a Russian czarist, and even an insane midwife. Later, a postcard is received by the police department dated October 1st and written by someone also claiming to be the Ripper with similar handwriting. "I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number 1 squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back. Till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper." This isn't confirmed, but there is information out there that this postcard was received by the press agency, or whoever received it, the morning after the night of the double event. The thing being there that's strange is none of the public knew about this double event because it hadn't been in papers yet. On October 16, a man named George Lusk received a letter. Lusk was the head of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, a group comprised of local businessmen to assist the police. The letter was signed from hell and it was delivered in a box with half a human kidney. The kidney, at the time, was believed to be Catherine Eddowes' missing kidney. However, it was found to be a prank by medical student. Nearly a month later, on November 9, 1888, the Ripper struck again. Mary Jeanette Kelly was the youngest of the women murdered. She was just 25. She was found at 13 Miller's Court in her bed by her landlord's assistant, who was seeking rent. Mary's throat had been cut, her nose and breasts cut and dumped on a table. Her entrails were draped over a picture frame. The body had been skinned and gutted and her heart was missing. Here's the landlord on the state of the body. The sight that we saw I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more like the work of a devil than of a man. And with that we arrive at the end of the 5 canonical victims, but as stated before, some believe there could be up to 11 victims. With Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, one should wonder if anybody caught a glimpse of this monster, and it would seem that people did. When aggregating eyewitness testimonies of those who believed they saw the Ripper, a rough outline of the killer can be visualized. It can be assumed that he was between 25 to 35 years old, roughly 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, stocky, with a fair complexion, and a mustache. Allegedly, he was seen wearing a dark overcoat and a dark hat. The Scotland Yard's Violent Crime Command team has said that Jack the Ripper, who one could call evil incarnated, could be described in appearance as perfectly sane, frighteningly normal, and yet capable of extraordinary cruelty. Sir Melville Macnaghten, the Scotland Yard's head of the Criminal Investigation Department in 1903, had a general suspicion of who the killer was. He knew that the Ripper had basic knowledge of anatomy, possibly a doctor, and in Macnaghten's notes he had narrowed his list of suspects down to 3 names. That being said, due to the overwhelming amount of compelling suspects and the fact that many feel the official 3 are not the Ripper, we're going to examine 8 names, starting with Macnaghten's 3 official suspects. The first suspect was Montague Johnson Druitt. Although there is very little evidence to implicate Druitt, he is considered by many to be the number 1 suspect in the case. The son of a medical practitioner, Druitt fitted the assumption of the detectives at the time that due to the gruesome disembowelment and removal of organs, Jack the Ripper would have had skills of a physician or butcher. The suspicion fell on Druitt after the memorandum of Macnaghten, who investigated the Ripper killings for Scotland Yard, became public. A doctor of about 41 years of age and a fairly good family, who disappeared at the time of the Miller's Court murder, and whose body was found floating in the Thames on 31 December, i.e. 7 weeks after the said murder. The body was said to have been in the water for a month, or more, from private information I have little doubt but that his own family suspected this man of being the Whitechapel murderer. It was alleged that he was sexually insane. Although Macnaghten did incorrectly age Druitt as 41, Druitt was 31 at the time of his death. It was clear that Macnaghten was implicating Druitt due to the details of his suicide. His suicide and the timing of this is the main reason that Druitt is suspected. There is little to no evidence of Druitt being the Ripper. Druitt resided in Blackheath and had no connection to Whitechapel. His only connection to the Ripper case is that made by Macnaghten. The second suspect was Michael Ostrog, a Russian doctor and a criminal. Ostrog has been in an asylum previously for homicidal tendencies. Macnaghten notes that Ostrog couldn't provide a strong alibi for his whereabouts during the murders. Ultimately, he was not convicted because there wasn't enough evidence linking him to the crime. The third suspect was Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was a Polish Jew hairdresser in Whitechapel, who spent some time in an asylum in 1889 after the last murder. Kosminski would actually reside in asylums until his death in 1919. Kosminski was known for his hatred towards women, particularly prostitutes. According to Macnaghten, his appearance matched descriptions provided by the police of a man in Mitre Square, which, if you'll recall, was the night of the double murder, where the Ripper likely zigzagged between the police. Kosminski might be a name familiar to the public due to the fact that recently his name made headlines due to his being featured in a book entitled, Naming Jack the Ripper. In this book, Russell Edwards claims that a shawl purchased at an auction contains DNA evidence proving Kosminski is the killer. The shawl was bought under the impression that it reportedly was at the murder scene, on the person of Catherine Eddowes, the fourth Ripper victim. Edwards enlisted the help of molecular biologist Jari Llewellyn of Liverpool John Moores University. Edwards and Llewellyn believed the blood-stained shawl is connected to Catherine Eddowes, based off of comparison from one of Eddowes' descendants. They also claim that semen on the scarf is linked to relatives of Kosminski. With this discovery, many felt that the case was closed, including Edwards. Author Russell Edwards stated, "I've got the only piece of forensic evidence in the whole history of the case. I've spent 14 years working on it, and we have definitely solved the mystery of who Jack the Ripper was. Only non-believers that want to perpetuate the myth will doubt. This is it now, we have unmasked him." But much to the chagrin of Mr. Edwards, that may not be the case. It turns out that the scientist may have made a critical error of nomenclature. Summed up, Dr. Llewellyn identified the mutation in DNA on both the scarf and in Eddowes' relative named Karen Miller. This mutation was believed to be named 314.1C, a mutation only found in 1 in 290,000 people, making it very likely it was a match. However, this identification was reportedly incorrect and was not 314.1C, but instead 315.1C, which is a mutation shared by more than 99% of people of European descent. Basically, this DNA could be anyone if true. Furthermore, Kosminski's DNA was linked to the scarf, using mitochondrial DNA, using a subtype that is far from unique. Sir Alec Jeffreys, who's regarded as the godfather of DNA fingerprinting, has said that this evidence needs to be subjected to peer review. No actual evidence has yet been provided. Further adding fuel to the fire of skeptics is the fact that Dr. Llewellyn has yet to publish this finding in a peer-reviewed scientific journal and has refused to answer questions to news outlets, thus making it impossible to verify his and Edwards' claims and effectively doing quite the opposite. The fourth suspect is the notion that Jack the Ripper was actually a female. A theory that ripperologists called Jill the Ripper. This theory was allegedly a hunch of famed Inspector Raberline, as well. The idea that all of the police were on the hunt for a man when they should have been searching for a woman would explain the Ripper being able to slip by without suspicion. The fifth suspect is famed painter Walter Sickert, a theory mainly posed by the successful crime novelist Patricia Cornwell. After making millions on her crime novels, Cornwell has devoted her time to the pursuit of Sickert as the Ripper. In 2001, Cornwell spent £2 million buying 32 of Sickert's paintings, letters, and even Sickert's writing desk in one bizarre stunt that was described by art curator Richard Schoen as monstrous stupidity. Cornwell went full national treasure Nicolas Cage by cutting up a painting in search of clues. Aside from stunts, Cornwell rightfully claims that Sickert was obsessed with the Ripper, which was true. Sickert referenced the Ripper in some of his paintings, even titling one Jack the Ripper's bedroom. Cornwell claims one painting mirrors the body position of fifth Ripper victim, Mary Kelly. She claims another painting mimics the facial wounds of fourth Ripper victim, Catherine Eddowes. There are also reportedly accounts of Sickert cosplaying as Jack the Ripper. Cornwell also shoots down the notion that Sickert's alibi was that he was in France at the onset of the murders. She cites sketches that place him in London in music halls at the time of at least 3 killings. However, the biggest piece of her case is the analysis of forensic paper expert Peter Bauer. Bauer identified 3 of Sickert's letters and 2 of the Ripper's letters as coming from a handmade paper run of only 24 possible sheets. Basically, the odds of both the Ripper and Sickert both writing letters on a batch of paper that only had 24 copies in existence is relatively slim, and while that is undoubtedly compelling evidence, it should be reminded that all of the Jack the Ripper letters are unconfirmed. The sixth suspect is Joseph Barnett, who's particularly suspicious as he actually lived with Mary Kelly, the final Ripper victim. In fact, Barnett may have lived in 10 different locations in East London, making him well versed in the area and capable of navigating back streets. Barnett worked as a fish porter, and it's believed that Barnett was in love with Kelly, according to an issue of the Daily Telegraph, on November 10, 1888. Barnett referred to Mary Kelly as his wife, when she was in fact only a roommate. Barnett also disagreed with Mary's life as a prostitute and strived to make money to keep her off the streets. "Marie never went on the streets when she lived with me." Some theorize that Barnett committed the first murders to scare Kelly off the streets, which, for a time, actually worked. But when Barnett lost his job, Kelly returned to the street to make ends meet. Their financial struggles often led to fights, and Barnett also disliked Kelly's love of gin. This culminated in one final fight over Kelly bringing home 2 different prostitutes, an act that Joseph found unacceptable. This fight apparently got violent. Even a window was broken. Shortly after, Barnett moved out, and only 10 days later, Mary Kelly was found dead in her apartment. After the murder, Barnett was questioned for 4 hours, but eventually set free. Having lived there, Barnett would have intimate knowledge of the household, including how to unlock the door from the outside. He was also aware of Kelly's schedule and tendencies. Details from the scene suggest Kelly was killed in her sleep, not by an outsider she invited in. Her clothes were folded by the bed as though they had been taken off in the ordinary manner, and she was wearing a nightgown. As a fish porter, Barnett would have crude anatomical knowledge. As a known associate of Kelly's, he would be someone local prostitutes knew, allowing him to get close enough for a sneak attack. Reportedly, one newspaper of the time stated that Barnett's friends called him Jack. He also matches the physical description and the psychological profile created of Jacktheripper by the FBI, and finally, the murders allegedly stopped after Mary Kelly, the last canonical victim. After her death, Barnett would have no other reason to kill anymore now that his lover, who he was trying to keep off the streets, was now dead. Francis Tumblety. Tumblety was suspected of being Jack the Ripper at the time of the murders. He was arrested on 7 November 1888 on unrelated charges and released on bail. Knowing that he was considered a suspect in the Ripper murders, Tumblety fled back to the United States via France. There is rumor that Scotland Yard tried to extradite him, but New York City police said there is no proof of his complicity in the Whitechapel murders, and the crime for which he is under bond in London is not extraditable. It doesn't seem clear why Tumblety was a suspect at the time, apart from his previous criminal record and his misogyny. His appearance was not similar to the descriptions of any of the eyewitness testimony, and there is no concrete evidence he even visited Whitechapel. It is claimed that Tumblety collected uteri. But this allegation was made by an unreliable witness who was a known practical joker, and the allegation had only been made after the press linked Tumblety to the murders. The final suspect is the most popular suspect is James Maybrick. Maybrick's death coincided with the stopping of the Ripper killings, as he died 1 year after the murders. Maybrick was an upper-class cotton merchant who resided in an estate called the Battle Crease House in Liverpool. Some would consider this to be a damning detail, as many feel the Ripper was a local man who likely wasn't upper-class. However, it should be pointed out that all the murders were committed on a weekend. It stands to reason that a wealthy cotton merchant would have the ability to travel on weekends, and it is also worth mentioning that he would have the benefit of not killing in his own locale. Though, what makes Maybrick such a popular suspect is what many consider the biggest piece of physical evidence that links him to the crimes. That piece of evidence is a diary reportedly discovered under the floorboards of Maybrick's estate. A diary that is signed, "I give my name that all know of me. So history do tell what love can do to a gentleman born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Also within the diary are reportedly intimate details of the killings. Backing up the diary's authenticity are scientific tests that have confirmed the diary seems to roughly match the era of the Ripper killings. The diary was apparently discovered by a scrap metal dealer named Mike Barrett, and this is where the story starts to lose its footing. Barrett actually admitted that he fabricated the diary only to recant the statement later, chalking it up to not wanting the publicity as he was going through a failing marriage. Also shaky is the definitive details of the discovery of the diary. Some sources have it falling into Barrett's hands via being handed down by various generations of family, while other sources have Barrett discovering it himself or Barrett's associates discovering it and then giving it to him due to their knowledge of Barrett being an inspiring author. However, all that aside, if the diary was in fact found under the floorboards of Maybrick's estate, it is a very strong possibility that he was in fact Jack the Ripper. Following this discovery, a gold pocket watch was reported as potential Ripper evidence. The watch apparently contains the scratched initials of the 5 canonical victims, in addition to the phrase, "I am Jack," and also J. Maybrick. The scratches were analyzed via electron microscope by Dr. Stephen Turgoose, whose study suggests that the scratches were not done in modern times. Another doctor named Robert Wilde at Bristol University's Interface Analysis Center concluded that the scratches could have been very, very old and were certainly not new. But it is difficult to be precise. The watch, which was displayed in a Liverpool jewellery shop by a college caretaker named Albert Johnson, is dated 1846 and was purchased for £225. But given the circus around the main piece of evidence and Maybrick's far location from the crimes, it's understandable to have doubts of him as the Ripper. For over 100 years, the mystery of Jack the Ripper has continued to fascinate the public. Perhaps one day we will have the means to solve the crime. Or perhaps this famous case will be yet another victim to time. But, for now, the age-old question will continue to persist. Who was Jack the Ripper? Please like the video and subscribe the channel for more cases and facts. See you in next video.